My name is Wren Calloway. I am 31 years old. And the $47,000 I borrowed to build my catering company, 3 years of planning, 14 months of credit building, one very carefully written business plan that a loan officer named Marcus Webb at Cornerstone Business Lending told me was one of the cleanest applications he had processed that quarter, was spent by my mother before I ever touched most of it. Not on equipment. Not on a commercial kitchen deposit or a refrigerated van or the liability insurance I had budgeted for, line by line, in a spreadsheet I had been maintaining and revising since I was 28 years old. It was spent on her credit card balance, her car refinancing, and 52 sessions with a personal trainer at a gym 4 miles from the house I grew up in. I did not know this for 6 months. For 6 months, I believed I had done something wrong with money I could not remember spending. That is a particular kind of disorientation I would not wish on anyone. The sensation of being told, repeatedly and by people who said they loved you, that you were careless and impulsive and not to be trusted with your own financial life, while having no evidence that any of it was true and no clear way to prove otherwise. My mother had that evidence the entire time. She had been counting on me not to look for it. The thing I want you to understand before I tell you the rest of this is that my mother is not a villain in the way that word usually works. She is not cold or calculated or indifferent to other people's suffering. She is, in many ways, a warm and generous person who loves her family and who spent my entire childhood showing up for me in ways that mattered. She came to every school play. She learned to make my grandmother's recipe for pepper soup after my grandmother died because she knew it was the one food that made me feel less far from home on hard days. She drove 4 hours round trip on a Tuesday in February to sit with me in a waiting room when I had a minor procedure and the doctor had said it was nothing serious, but I had been frightened anyway. She is not a villain. She is a woman who made a series of choices over the course of a few months that she presumably justified to herself each time, and who was counting on love being strong enough to absorb the consequences when I eventually found out. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that what she did to me was not the act of a person who did not love me. It was the act of a person who loved herself more, in the specific moment when it counted, and who believed, I think genuinely believed, that she would find a way to make it right before I ever had to know. The problem with that belief is that it required me to stay in the dark indefinitely, and I am not a person who stays in the dark. The catering company had been my plan since I was 24 years old, working as a line cook at the Hargrove Hotel restaurant downtown and doing private dinner parties on weekends for extra money. I had a talent for it. Not a modest talent, but a real and specific one, the kind that other people recognize before you have fully named it yourself. A woman named Patricia Sung, a corporate event planner with an extensive client roster, pulled me aside after a 12-person dinner I had catered for her colleagues on a Friday evening in October and said, "You should be running your own operation, not someone else's." She handed me her card. She said if I ever launched a proper company, she would put me on her preferred vendor list within 90 days of my first licensed event. I was 26 when Patricia said that. I spent the next 2 years building the foundation that would make the loan possible. A secured credit card I paid in full every single month without exception, starting in January of that year, because Marcus Webb had told me in a preliminary consultation that lenders wanted to see 24 months of clean credit behavior for a business applicant with no prior business history. A part-time bookkeeping course at Edgewood Community College on Tuesday evenings, 6 months long, that taught me enough to build a proper profit and loss projection. A food handler certification and a food safety manager certification, both completed by the following spring. An LLC filing, Calloway Catering LLC, that cost me $312 in state fees and took 4 weeks to process, and which I stared at on my laptop screen for a long time when the confirmation arrived. The way you stare at something you have been working toward long enough that seeing it finally real feels slightly unbelievable. My mother had been present for most of the planning years, in the way that a parent is present when they are proud of something without yet understanding what it will require. She came to my apartment for dinner the evening I finished the first draft of the business plan, and I walked her through each section: market analysis, operations, staffing projections, financial model, and she asked good questions and seemed genuinely engaged, and when she left she hugged me at the door and said, "You've thought about every single thing." She said it with admiration. I believed she meant it. I think she did mean it. What I did not fully understand then is that admiration and respect are different things. Admiration watches you from a comfortable distance. Respect gets out of the way. By the time I walked into Marcus Webb's office on February 11th of the year I turned 31, I had a business plan that was 53 pages long, a personal credit score of 741, 18 months of projected revenue based on Patricia Sung's referral network and 3 other prospective clients I had documented, and a clear and specific accounting of how every dollar of the loan would be used. Marcus approved the application on March 7th. He shook my hand and said, "You did your homework." I said, "I've been doing it for 2 years." He said, "It shows." The loan was $47,000, structured in 2 tranches. The first disbursement, $28,000 on approval. The second, $19,000 at the 60-day progress mark, contingent on a brief review call. Interest rate, 6.4% fixed. Monthly payment, $923, beginning 90 days after first disbursement. I had modeled it 3 ways: optimistic, moderate, and conservative, and even the conservative scenario showed the payments manageable by month 4. I signed the documents on March 12th at 3:15 p.m. in Marcus's office. My mother was with me. She had asked to come. I had let her because she had asked with the genuine excitement of a parent watching their child do something real, and I had wanted to share it with her. The offer to manage the disbursements came 3 days later, on the evening of March 15th, at 7:46 p.m. I was at my stove making dinner, and she called, and I wedged the phone between my ear and my shoulder the way you do when you are not planning to have an important conversation. She said, "I've been thinking about the loan money. You're going to have a lot of it arriving at once and a lot of things pulling at it from different directions at the same time. Vendor deposits and equipment and insurance and all of it hitting together. What if I held it in my account and we dispersed it together as each expense came due? You'd have a second set of eyes on everything. You wouldn't have to worry about making a wrong move right at the beginning." I said, "Mom, I've been planning this for 2 years. I have a spreadsheet for every line item." She said, "I know you do, and it's wonderful. I'm not saying you can't manage it. I'm saying you don't have to do it alone. That's all. I'm your mother. Let me help." I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 days. I made a list of reasons it was unnecessary. Then I transferred the first tranche, $28,000, to her personal savings account on March 17th at 2:31 p.m. because she was my mother and she had earned my trust across 31 years of showing up, and I was not yet practiced in the idea that the person who loves you most in the world can also be the person who costs you the most. I have the bank confirmation of that transfer. I have saved it in 3 places. The first vendor payment was supposed to go out on April 3rd. A deposit of $4,750 to a commercial kitchen rental facility called Meridian Prep, which I had reserved for a 6-month block beginning May 1st. A licensed commercial kitchen was the foundational piece of the entire launch. Without it, I could not legally produce food for commercial sale. I had selected Meridian Prep after visiting 4 facilities over 3 weekends in February, and I had given my mother the invoice on March 22nd with a note on top that said, "Please transfer this by April 1st at the latest. They need 72 hours to process." On April 4th, I received an email from Meridian Prep's office manager, a woman named Diane Holst, saying the deposit had not arrived and asking whether I intended to honor the reservation or whether they should open the slot to their waitlist. I called my mother at 8:14 a.m. on April 4th. She said she had been meaning to send it, but the week had been hectic. She said she would do it that afternoon. I said, "Today, Mom, before 3 p.m. She said, "Wren," I said, "I'll do it. You don't need to manage me." I apologized. I should not have apologized. She did not send the transfer that day. She did not send it the next day either. I called again on April 6th at 6:47 p.m. She said there had been an issue with her bank's outgoing transfer verification, a new security protocol they had implemented, and she was sorting it out and it would be resolved within 48 hours. I wrote that explanation in a small notebook I kept on my nightstand, where I had started writing down our conversations about the money because something in me, Not suspicion, not yet, just a low-frequency attentiveness, had decided the record was worth keeping. On April 9th, Meridian Prep released my reservation to the next person on their waitlist. I paid a second deposit of $4,750 out of my personal savings account, money I had set aside as a 3-month emergency buffer that I had not intended to touch, to reserve a smaller commercial kitchen called Eastgate Prep on the opposite end of the city, which had an available slot starting June 1st. That pushed my launch back 5 weeks. My first 2 booked events had to be rescheduled. Patricia Sung was gracious about it. I told her there had been a facilities delay. I did not say anything else. In the weeks that followed, 3 more payments failed to arrive. A $2,300 equipment rental deposit for my first test event, due April 18th. The company released the reservation on April 21st when nothing came through. A $1,847 payment to a graphic designer named Cole Reyes, who had agreed to design my menus and branding materials on a net 30 contract and who, by late April, had sent 2 polite follow-up emails asking about payment status. A $640 food safety recertification course I had enrolled in for May that dropped me from the roster on May 2nd for non-payment. Each time I asked my mother, she had a fresh explanation. The bank's verification system had flagged a large outgoing transfer, and she had to call to release it. The payment had posted on her end, but was pending processing. She had entered the account number incorrectly once and had to resubmit. The explanations were always slightly different in their details and always just plausible enough that I spent more energy second-guessing my own anxiety than questioning her. She was my mother. The alternative, the thing I was not yet willing to fully form into a thought, was too large and too painful to stand and look at directly. Before I tell you what happened at my Aunt Gloria's dinner in May, I want to ask you something. What is the season where you are right now? Is it the kind of time of year when things are still opening up, still becoming, or is it the part of the year when everything has already peaked and you are beginning to understand what this particular season actually turned out to be? I ask because the months I am describing had that second quality. Everything looked fine from a certain angle. Everything was not fine. On Sunday, May 12th, my Aunt Gloria hosted a family dinner. There were 6 adults present besides me: my mother, my Aunt Gloria, my Aunt Renata, my cousin Deja, my cousin Marcus, and my mother's closest friend Sylvia, who had been family adjacent for so long that she appeared at every gathering as a matter of course. I arrived at 5:30 p.m. The house smelled like roasted garlic and something sweet in the oven. My Aunt Gloria showed me her garden before dinner, walking me through the raised beds the way she always did, telling me what had come up this year and what had not, and I followed her, and I listened and I felt for that half hour in the garden before dinner, almost like myself. Dinner was served at 6:15 p.m. For the first 40 minutes, it was ordinary, the kind of dinner where everyone talks over each other mildly, and the food is passed, and someone always takes the last of the bread without asking. Then at 7:08 p.m., while we were still at the table and the dishes were being cleared, my cousin Deja said, in the tone of someone relaying information they believe is already widely known and merely wanted to confirm, "Wren, your mom was saying you've been having trouble with the startup money. That some of it got away from you before you had a solid vendor plan in place." The table did not go quiet. That is what I remember most clearly. Nobody paused or looked uncertain. They all had the settled, sympathetic expression of people who had already heard this version of events and had already decided how they felt about it. My Aunt Renata said, "It happens to a lot of people on a first business." Sylvia said, "The important thing is you learn from it." My Aunt Gloria said, "You are always better at the cooking than the business side. Maybe find a partner who handles the finance piece." My cousin Marcus said nothing but nodded slowly, which was somehow worse. I looked at my mother. She was cutting her food into small, deliberate pieces. She did not look up. I said, "I haven't spent anything improperly. The disbursements have been delayed because of bank processing issues." My mother said, still without looking at me, "Wren, nobody is criticizing you. We're just concerned." I said, "What specifically have you told people?" She set her fork down then. She looked at me with an expression I had seen before, patient, slightly tired, the look of a woman who has been misunderstood by her daughter too many times to explain it again. She said, I mentioned to Gloria that there had been some cash flow challenges, and she was worried. That's all. I was talking to my sister about my daughter. Is that not allowed? My Aunt Gloria said, We only want to help, sweetheart. My Aunt Renata said, This is what family is for. I looked around the table at these people who had known me my entire life and who were, in that moment, entirely on the wrong side of the story without knowing it and without anyone to tell them. I said, Thank you. I'm fine. I excused myself at 7:53 p.m. I drove home carefully, the way you drive when something large is settled and you are being deliberate about small things because the large thing requires a different kind of attention. I sat in the parking structure outside my building for 23 minutes with the engine running and my hands in my lap and the radio off, watching the fluorescent light on the concrete wall. I thought about the dinner. I thought about my Aunt Renata saying it happens to a lot of people in the gentle, conclusive tone of someone who has already closed the file. I thought about my mother cutting her food into small pieces and not looking at me, and about the word challenges, which was apparently the word she had been using with my family to describe what was happening to my money. I thought about the notebook on my nightstand with 6 weeks of handwritten call logs in it. I thought about how many times I had accepted an explanation and moved on. Something inside me finally hardened instead of bent. Not in anger. I want to be precise about this because I think the distinction matters. It was not the hot and clarifying feeling of righteous fury that people describe when they talk about moments like this. It was colder than that and quieter. The feeling of a question that has been circling for weeks finally completing its circuit and arriving at an answer you had been resisting because the answer required you to do something difficult and permanent. I drove home. I made tea. I opened my laptop and I opened the folder I had been keeping and I read every document in it from the first entry to the last, and then I closed the laptop and I went to bed. I lay in the dark for a while. Then I got up and I called Frances Obi. Frances Obi was a business and civil attorney at Obi Legal Group, and her name had come to me through Cole Reyes, the graphic designer, who had used her 18 months earlier to resolve a contract dispute with a client who had refused to pay a final invoice on delivery of a completed brand package. Cole had described her as someone who was direct, thorough, and practically oriented, someone who told you what you had and what you did not have without making you feel either stupid or panicked, and who did not bill you for 20 minutes of her thinking out loud when 10 would do. I had saved her number in my phone after Cole mentioned her and had never used it. That number had been sitting in my contacts under the label Frances Obi, attorney, Cole Rec, for 18 months. I used it at 11:23 p.m. on May 12th, which was later than was probably appropriate for a first call to a professional contact, but she answered on the third ring, and she listened without interrupting while I explained the situation in approximately 9 minutes. When I finished, she said, "What documentation do you have of the original arrangement?" I listed everything. The bank transfer confirmation from March 17th, every text message in the thread with my mother about the disbursements, the vendor invoices I had given her with dates, the notebook with handwritten records of our phone conversations, the cornerstone loan documents showing the stated business purpose of the funds. Frances said, "Good. I want all of it in an email to me tonight. Don't contact your mother. Don't mention to anyone in your family that you've called me. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to submit a formal records request to your mother's bank citing a potential dispute over misdirected business funds. Can you be in my office at 9 a.m.? I said yes. I spent the next 90 minutes organizing the documents and sending them. I went to sleep at 1:40 a.m. At 9 a.m. on May 13th, I sat across from Frances in her office on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street, with a paper cup of coffee I wasn't drinking and my folder open in front of me. She had reviewed the documents I'd sent overnight. She explained the legal framework in clear terms. The loan was in my name. I bore the liability. The funds were mine from the moment of disbursement. When I transferred them to my mother's account for the specific stated purpose of managing business expenditures, I created an agency relationship. She was authorized to spend that money for business purposes and only for business purposes as my agent. Any use of those funds for personal purposes without my knowledge or consent, she said, was conversion. I said, "Even though I transferred it to her willingly?" She said, "You transferred it for a specific purpose. If she used it for a different purpose, the willingness of the transfer doesn't protect her. The scope of authorization does." I said, How do we find out what she spent it on? Francis said, We asked the bank. The bank records request went in that morning. While we waited, Francis advised me to secure the second tranche directly. I called Marcus Webb at Cornerstone at 10:47 a.m. and asked him to redirect the $19,000 disbursement to my business checking account. He confirmed this was standard process. On May 15th, the second tranche deposited directly into Callaway Catering LLC's business account. My mother called me at 3:22 p.m. that day to ask when the second disbursement was arriving. I said, It went to my business account. A long pause. She said, Why would you do that? I said, Because it's my business account, Mom. She said, You didn't tell me. I said, No. I ended the call. The bank records arrived on May 21st. Frances called me at 3:37 p.m. She said, I have the statements. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of water in front of me that I was not drinking. I said, Tell me. She read through the line items across the 12 weeks since March 17th. My mother's Visa credit card payment, $11,240 in 4 installments. Her car loan refinancing, $8,300, transferred March 19th, 2 days after I had sent the first tranche. A gym membership and personal training package, $3,190 in 3 charges. A dental procedure, $2,847, paid April 2nd, the day before Meridian Prep was waiting for a deposit that never came. 2 weekend trips, $1,640 and $2,180. Retail charges across multiple merchants, $4,730. Frances stopped. She said, The total traceable to personal expenditures is $34,127. The remaining balance in the account is $1,847. Outside my window, a pigeon sat very still on the fire escape rail. I said, 41 wire transfers. Frances said, 41 line items, yes. I said, She told my family I blew it on clothes and vacations. Frances said quietly, I know. I'm sorry, Wren. I said, Okay, what do we do next? Frances filed the civil complaint on June 4th at 2:14 p.m., conversion of funds and breach of fiduciary duty, with a request for injunctive relief. The filing notification reached my mother's attorney, a man named Robert Hale, by 4:30 p.m. The fact that she already had an attorney, retained sometime in late May, told me she had known for weeks this was coming. My mother called me at 5:02 p.m. I did not answer. She called at 5:17, 5:44, and 6:31 p.m. She texted at 6:34 p.m. Wren, please call me. We can work this out. I never meant for it to go this far. At 7:02 p.m., I was going to pay it back. I always intended to pay it back. At 8:45 p.m., your Aunt Gloria is devastated. You are tearing this family apart. I read each message once, documented the timestamp, and did not respond. That evening, my mother left 11 voicemails. I listened to each once. The early ones were tearful and apologetic in a way that felt genuine, the way genuine things feel when they are also strategic. The fourth, at 7:38 p.m., said, I built your confidence. I believed in you before you believed in yourself. And this is what you do. The fifth said only, I am your mother. I listened to that one twice. Then I closed the app and made dinner and went to bed. By June 10th, my Aunt Gloria had called twice. My Aunt Renata texted asking me to handle this privately. My cousin Deja left a voicemail saying, You can't do this to your own mother. I saved every message and labeled each one in the folder. I did not forget, even then, that 4 weeks earlier these same people had accepted without question that I was bad with money. The discovery process ran through the summer. On September 14th, Robert Hale contacted Frances with a settlement offer, $22,000 returned in monthly installments of $1,100 over 20 months. I said, Counter it full. $34,127 in a lump sum, plus $11,400 in damages, plus fees. No installments. 60 days. Francis sent the counter on September 16th. On September 21st, Robert Hale called with my mother's acceptance. Total settlement, $34,127 returned, plus $11,400 in damages, plus $4,930 in attorney fees. Total recovered, $50,457. The payment cleared on November 3rd at 1:47 p.m. Francis texted a confirmation screenshot at 2:03 p.m. I was standing at the prep counter at Eastgate Prep, portioning mushroom risotto into hotel pans for a corporate dinner. 42 guests, Patricia Sung's referral, my 4th event in 6 weeks. I read the text. I set the phone face down on the counter. I picked up the spoon and went back to the risotto. That was the moment I had imagined for 5 months. In none of the versions I had pictured had I been portioning risotto when it arrived. Real things arrive in the middle of the ordinary, which is the only honest place for them to land. I launched Callaway Catering officially on June 1st, 6 weeks behind schedule, and by year-end had booked 23 events with gross revenue of $87,400, $14,200 ahead of the conservative projection I had built at a community college desk when I was 28. I have not had a full conversation with my mother since the settlement. She called at Thanksgiving, twice, at 11:42 a.m. and again at 3:07 p.m., as if testing whether a softer hour might get a different answer. I let both ring. She sent a Christmas card with a handwritten note. I think about you every day. I hope the business is going well. I love you. The card had a generic watercolor pine on the front. I set it on the counter and read the 3 sentences, which said everything and resolved nothing, and then put it in the drawer where I keep the things I am not yet ready to throw away and not yet ready to act on. There is a distance between what someone owes you and what they are capable of giving, and no court can measure that gap. What a court can do is return the money. What it cannot return are the months, or the family dinners where you sat across from aunts who believed you were irresponsible while your mother refilled her wine glass, or the particular weight of trusting completely and finding out, line item by line item, that the trust had been a resource being drawn down. I fold napkins on Sunday mornings in my prep kitchen while the city is still quiet. The light comes through the industrial windows at a long angle, and I fold them into thirds and stack them in the warming drawer, and I think about the next event and the one after that. The work is what is real. Loyalty without honesty is not loyalty. It is just a story 2 people agree to keep telling until one of them stops. When you authorize anyone, family or otherwise, to manage business funds on your behalf, that authorization is legally bounded by its stated purpose. Any use of those funds for a different purpose is actionable under the doctrine of conversion, even without a written contract, provided you can document the original arrangement and the business purpose of the funds. Before giving any person access to your business account, consult a business attorney. Open a dedicated account in your name only, and set dual signature requirements on outgoing transfers above a limit you define. If you were in Wren's place, if your mother had spent $34,000 of your business loan on her own debts and told your entire family you had wasted it, would you have accepted the installment plan she first offered, just to close it faster? Or would you have countered for full recovery the way Wren did, even knowing it meant months more of uncertainty?